but as a kid I used to go to Venice Beach, which is not exactly now what it was then. It was just a place to go see the water. And walk down a street called Paloma, a very small, short 2-block street. At the end of that street there was I wouldn't call it a flop house, it was a kind of, I don't know, just a beach hotel, you know. And on the bottom floor, there was a sign stuck in somebody's window, man, woman, I don't know. But the sign said, Charlie Parker was a great electrician who went around wiring people. I had no idea what the line was from, whose words it were. And of course, later I found out it was a famous line from Bob Kaufmann. So that was my first encounter with Bob Kaufmann. Kaufmann is kind of interesting in the beat movement and in American letters because he is a guy who has no other, in a way, reason to exist other than his poetry. There are no letters between Kaufmann and other writers. He did not do critical writing. He simply wrote poetry and lived this life. I'm going to read just a couple of sentences from the introduction to his selected works. It's called Cranial Guitar. It says, Bob Kaufmann's life as a poet is unique to American literature. He kept no diary or journal, published no literary essays, wrote no reviews, and maintained no correspondences. He is remembered by 3 volumes of poetry and a few broadsides and songs. Up until his death from emphysema in January of 1986, Kaufmann was known as a mostly silent, wiry black man who walked the streets of San Francisco's North Beach district day and night, often appearing as a mendicant, madman, or panhandler. Yet various schools of American poetry have sung his praises. Recognized early on as a major figure in the beat generation of writers and poets, Kaufmann is also known as one of America's true surrealist poets, a premier jazz poet, and a major poet of the Black consciousness movement. So much did he embody a French tradition of the poet as outsider, madman, and outcast, that in France, Kaufmann was called the Black Rimbaud. Allen Ginsberg, quote, Simon Watson Taylor, the pataphysician and translator, would make a point every time he went to San Francisco of seeing Kaufmann. And I think Kaufmann was the only poet that Taylor felt really had a true surrealist muse. As an old habitué of cafe meetings with Breton and the original surrealist groups, he had the taste and knew the real stuff and knew what it was like in French too. He was always totally respectful of Kaufmann as being the great surrealist American poet. Allen Ginsberg. He wasn't just political. He was metaphysical, psychological, surrealist, and enlightened in extending his care into the whole society of poetry, seeing that as revolution. There was a kind of psychological revolution going on along with the liberation of the word. Jerry Kamstra, writer, cultural activist. He was actually the man that Herb Caen coined the term beatnik to describe, because he was in the news all the time for being busted. He used to run up and down Grant Avenue jumping on cars and shouting his poetry. Jack Michelin, who was probably Bob Kaufmann's best friend. He knew how to rumble. He knew how to live it. He loved it. He loved it quick. He lived it fast. He was a real poet. How many real poets can you meet in your life? He was close to what was happening, and he was out of it and in it. He was into some magic of his own. He had magic. The man was a musician and a magician. He had beautiful magic. I'm going to read a stanza, I guess I should call it a chorus, really, from one of Paul Kaufmann's most famous works. It was actually published as a separate poem in its time. It is called The Ancient Rain. I'll read a couple of choruses from that, and then I'll finish with Hawk Lawler. The Ancient Rain. At the illusion of the world that has come into existence, a world that exists secretly, as meanwhile the humorous Nazis on television will not be as laughable, but be replaced by silent and blank TV screens. At this time, the dead nations of Europe and Asia shall cast up the corpses from the graveyards they have become. But today, the ancient rain falls from the far sky. It will be white, like the rain that fell on the day Abraham Lincoln died. It shall be red rain, like the rain that fell when George Washington abolished monarchy. It shall be blue rain, like the rain that fell when John Fitzgerald Kennedy died. This is a piece of Kaufmann's that was never actually collected. It was found after he was dead, not in his papers, because a lot of his work actually disappeared. He didn't collect his work, he didn't save it. His first book was called Golden Sardines. Thank you, Michael. Golden Sardines was actually found in a paper bag in a place that he formerly had lived. So he was not really a guy who held on to things. He held on to his vows, though. I don't know if you're familiar with one of the great poetic vows of the second half of the 20th century, but in 1969, Kaufmann took an oath, not to speak until the Vietnam War was over. And for 6.5 years, he did not speak a word to anybody he knew, nor to his wife or child. I think at the end of April 1975, when the United States left Vietnam officially, he began to speak again.